Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Chasing Psychological Safety. We're talking about some fundamentals today, back to the basics of where we started a couple of years ago, where we are today, and what the pandemic has meant to our outlook on work. So if you went back in time, you would have seen that we've been writing about the fact that work has to fundamentally change for the last, 3 years. In fact, one of the ones that we wanted to talk to you about, we've already touched on 2018, 2019 in Forbes and in other publications, and it had to do with the fact that if we want the future of work to materialize, then we have to go back to questioning everything. And we meant that a serious exploration that goes back to basics and looks at the actual fundamentals of why, where, when, who, and how of work has to occur almost everywhere. That it's time for each of the organizations that we were ever speaking to, whether they were big or small in any kind of industry, that they do a very serious audit of those questions. And we said that again 2 or 3 years ago, and we all know that that's a very current conversation today. So meanwhile, because of the events that have put us into this kind of POC of new types of work, whether we liked it or not, and for an unfortunate reason, we have ended up in this situation where teams have found themselves at home or in a really difficult environment, even if they weren't at home. And the way that the interaction between them has changed because of this is very interesting. And those organizations that had done some of this exploration before time were in a better place. Those that had never touched it and they just presumed they can continue working in virtue of inertia for the rest of eternity were in a different place. So today we'll just walk you through some of these again. In case you hadn't done them, it's now high time that you do the thinking.
Yeah. So thinking about that list that's just been mentioned, we're going to start with the where, and leading also on from that idea of the POC that the last 12 months has been for us. The good news is that we need to, well, first of all, we need to interrogate this topic. We need to, particularly at this tipping point with the world slowly but surely opening back up, we need to be really, really laser focused on how we establish what the where is going to look like for our teams. In order to retain psychologically safe and strong teams during this transition phase, we mustn't just assume that we know what people need. We mustn't just assume going back to the office is the right thing. We mustn't just assume all remote is the right thing. We must interrogate and understand and speak to our people and do this collectively, because as we've discussed before, this idea of anything to do with hybrid working is going to be dependent on understanding the individual and collective needs of your team. The good news I was just mentioning is that prior to COVID and the pandemic, a lot of good work has been done to lay the foundations for how we approach the where and how we make it work. So if you look at the work of Matt Mullenweg at WordPress, the five distributed levels of autonomy. If you look at the work of GitHub, you know, there are actually resources that have been written by teams that have gone through this process before, and we really recommend that you look at those. So you haven't got to interrogate the where blind. There are resources and experiences out there that you can rely on, but you absolutely do need to think about that very, very hard in the coming months.
Right, so that's the where, and it needs serious looking at. It doesn't need a policy, it needs a serious interrogation, like Fionn is saying. And then one that we keep talking about, and I feel like that one we're even further from understanding than we are understanding the where, which has become quite the topic lately, is the when. Simply because we have this collective belief that work has to happen between 9 and 4 or 9 and 5 at this particular location, and whether it's a location or not, the hours of operation of the knowledge industry seem to be the same ones across the board, and the common convention is that they have to happen for a solid period of time at a certain time in the day. And that's evidently an assumption we're making because we got used to it, like all other assumptions for these questions. But it is rarely born out of any type of practical consideration. So we're not doing that because that's when people are most productive. We're not doing that because that's when people bring their best selves. We're not doing that because that's when they can be in the same place necessarily, in particular now with distributed and remote teams. We're simply doing that because that's how we've always done it. And this is not a time to continue doing things that we haven't examined. So since we're redefining the where, and since we're looking at all the other bits as to how we're doing this and who all is doing this, this is the time to be truly forensic about what are those times that best suit the individual and best suit the team. Obviously, we're going to have that intersection because we have to meet, because we have to do things collaboratively, but there are plenty of times when we do things individually, and in that solo work, there's no reason for it to be mandated at a certain time. So all of us that have flexibility in our work lives know how amazingly more efficient we are when we are in the zone and we are in flow. And so the kind of holy grail of this would be that enterprises find ways that they have collaborative work when it fits best for the entire team, maybe even in person, and that individual work happens when it best happens in terms of flow, when it fits in your family life, when it fits in your personal life, when indeed you can be in the zone, because you'll accomplish more in an hour of being in the zone than 2 days of looking at the clock in the office.
Yeah. And that when the work hours is one component of the ways of working, the how. So what are the different systems, dare I say it, and processes and technologies that we're going to use to create an environment where this team can really flourish? So we need the behaviors, we need the psychological safety, but if we have that, we can really work together to optimize our productivity and to use the tools available to us. So ways of working covers behaviors and it covers tools. If you read any of that research that I talked about earlier, you know, they talk very much about asynchronous working, more documentation, ways to make the virtual/hybrid environment way more efficient. There's the agile methodology that we talk about a lot. There's a whole of the newsletter about that, you know, really lends itself to having both the human, psychologically safe environment for the best ways of working in hybrid working, and also lends itself to the tools and the process side of things. You've got to have both elements of that for the environment to work. We simply cannot, unfortunately, pick up what we did before and slot that into the environment that we're working in now, the all remote, and we won't be able to do that into the hybrid environment either. But again, the good news is that the tools and the processes and the experience and the case studies are out there for us to look at and see what we can work to fit with our teams and our environment. And once we get that right, people will have the real confidence to work in the best way they possibly can together.
Right, and speaking of people, that is your who. Obviously, it sounds like an evident answer, but it isn't as simple as that, chiefly because we have somewhere along the way amassed so much human debt that we've stopped thinking of our people as humans. And we've started thinking of them as resources, obviously. But so going back to the very people nature of our employees is really important. That's the number one thing in terms of who. Secondly, redefining what leadership is and realigning around the values of servant leadership in lieu of command and control is absolutely imperative, so that we can navigate this new reality where people are working from different places at different times and in different ways. We need a different type of leadership for that, and that's servant leadership. And once we manage to put that in place, apologies for that, once we manage to put that in place, we're going to be able to have autonomous teams that have the ability to keep learning, to keep innovating, to keep moving ahead in a psychologically safe way.
Absolutely. And then the next step for those teams and those people, those human beings that are working together, is to have shared purpose. This is the why. And without the why, the glue that binds us together, we cannot have psychologically safe, productive teams. So, you know, one of the first pieces of work we would do, a team might do in a team coaching environment would be to ensure that that why and that purpose, individually and collectively, was really strong and in place and connected with, because that connects people to each other, and it connects people to their work, and it drives that productivity, and it puts those teams in the position that we talk about often, where they're really flying. So really understanding the meaning and impact of the work they're doing, as Google refer to in their research, and really connecting themselves to that as a team, then that means the team can really, really gel and glue. And again, in the hybrid working environment, in order to have a psychologically safe team, they need to have that connection to keep them together at all times, even when they're not actually together. So the last thing that we would say is, with regards to all of these, the where, the when, the who, and the why, and the how, don't forget the how. For those of you that are using our dashboard, look at all of the psychological safety components and the impression management, all the data that you've got in that dashboard, through the prism of all of those 5 elements that we've just talked about. And then you'll be able to start connecting that data to how you are going to really interrogate how the team is working together, and move it forward from here to be a truly psychologically safe, highly productive team. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.